Chapter 4. Concentration. Along with purity, as a help to bring it about, concentration. Purity and concentration are indeed two aspects, feminine and masculine, passive and active, of the same status of being. Purity is the condition in which concentration becomes entire, rightly effective, omnipotent. By concentration, purity does its works, and without it would only lead to a state of peaceful quiescence and eternal repose. Their opposites are also closely connected, for we have seen that impurity is a confusion of dharmas, a lax, mixed, and mutually entangled action of the different parts of the being. And this confusion proceeds from an absence of right concentration of its knowledge on its energies in the embodied soul. The fault of our nature is first an inert subjection to the impacts of things, as they come in upon the mind pell-mell, without order or control, and then a haphazard, imperfect concentration managed fitfully, irregularly, with a more or less chance emphasis on this or that object, according as they happen to interest, not the higher soul or the judging and discerning intellect, but the restless, leaping, fickle, easily tired, easily distracted lower mind, which is the chief enemy of our progress. In such a condition, purity, the right working of the functions, the clear, unstained, and luminous order of the being is an impossibility. The various workings, given over to the chances of the environment and external influences, must necessarily run into each other and clog, divert, distract, pervert. Equally, without purity, the complete, equal, flexible concentration of the being in right thought, right will, right feeling, or secure status of spiritual experience is not possible. Therefore, the two must proceed together, each helping the victory of the other, until we arrive at that eternal calm from which may proceed some partial image in the human being of the eternal, omnipotent, and omniscient activity. But in the path of knowledge as it is practiced in India, concentration is used in a special and more limited sense. It means that removal of the thought from all distracting activities of the mind, and that concentration of it on the idea of the one by which the soul rises out of the phenomenal into the one reality. It is by the thought that we dissipate ourselves in the phenomenal. It is by the gathering back of the thought into itself that we must draw ourselves back into the real. Concentration has three powers by which this aim can be effected. By concentration on anything whatsoever, we are able to know that thing, to make it deliver up its concealed secrets. We must use this power to know not things, but the one thing in itself. By concentration again, the whole will can be gathered up for the acquisition of that which is still ungrasped, still beyond us. This power, if it is sufficiently trained, sufficiently single-minded, sufficiently sincere, sure of itself, faithful to itself alone, absolute in faith, we can use it for the acquisition of any object whatsoever. But we ought to use it not for the acquisition of the many objects which the world offers to us, but to grasp spiritually that one object worthy of pursuit, which is also the one subject worthy of knowledge. By concentration of our whole being on the one status of itself, we can become whatever we choose. We can become, for instance, even if we were a mass of weaknesses and fears, a mass instead of strength and courage. Or we can become all a great purity, holiness and peace, or a single universal soul of love. But we ought, it is said, to use this power to become not even these things, high as they may be in comparison with what we are now, but rather to become that which is above all things and free from all action and attributes, the pure and absolute being. All other concentration can only be valuable for a preparation, for previous steps, for a gradual training of the dissolute and dissipating thought, will, and being towards their grand and unique object. The use of concentration implies, like every other, a previous purification. It implies also in the end a renunciation, a cessation, and lastly an ascent into the absolute and transcendent state of samadhi, from which, if it culminates, if it endures, there is, except for perhaps one soul out of many thousands, no return. For by that we go to the supreme state of the eternal, whence souls revert not into the cyclical action of nature. And it is into the samadhi that the yogin who aims at release from the world seeks to pass away at the time of leaving his body. We see this succession in the discipline of Raja Yoga. For first, the Raja Yogin must arrive at a certain moral and spiritual purity. He must get rid of the lower or downward activities of his mind, but afterwards he must stop all its activities and concentrate himself in the one idea that leads from activity to the quiescence of status. The Raja Yogic concentration has several stages: that in which the object is seized, that in which it is held, that in which the mind is lost in the status of which the object represents, or to which the concentration leads. And only the last is termed samadhi in the Raja Yoga, although the word is capable, as in the Gita, of a much wider sense. But in the Raja Yogic samadhi, there are different grades of status: that in which the mind, though lost to outward objects, still muses, thinks, the mind perceives in the world, that in which the mind is still capable of primary thought formations, and that in which all outdarting of the mind, even within itself, have ceased. The soul rises beyond thought into the silence of the incommunicable and ineffable. In all yoga, there are indeed many preparatory objects of thought concentration, forms, verbal formulas of thought, significant names, all of which are supports to the mind in this movement, all of which have to be used and transcended. The highest support, according to the Upanishads, is the mystic syllable Om, whose 3 letters represent the Brahman, or Supreme Self, in its 3 degrees of status: the waking soul, the dream soul, and the sleep soul. And the whole potent sound rises towards that which is beyond status as beyond activity. For of all yoga of knowledge, the final goal is the transcendent. We have, however, conceived as the aim of an integral yoga something more complex and less exclusive. Less exclusively positive of the highest condition of the soul, less exclusively negative of its divine radiations. We must aim indeed at the highest, the source of all, the transcendent, but not to the exclusion of that which it transcends, rather as the source of an established experience and supreme state of the soul, which shall transform all other states and remold our consciousness of the world into the form of its secret truth. We do not seek to excise from our being all consciousness of the universe, but to realize God, truth and self, in the universe as well as transcendent of it. We shall seek, therefore, not only the ineffable, but also his manifestation as infinite being, consciousness, and bliss, embracing the universe and at play in it. For that triune infinity is his supreme manifestation, and that we shall aspire to know, to share in, and to become. And since we seek to realize this trinity not only in itself, but in its cosmic play, we shall aspire also to knowledge of and participation in the universal divine truth, knowledge, will, love, which are his secondary manifestation, his divine becoming. With this too we shall aspire to identify ourselves towards With this too we shall aspire to identify ourselves. Towards this too we shall strive to rise, and when the period of effort is past, allow it by our renunciation of all egoism to draw us up into our being, and to descend into us and embrace us in all our becoming. This is not only as a means of approach and passage to his supreme transcendence, but as the condition, even when we possess and are possessed by the transcendent, of a divine life in the manifestation of the cosmos. In order that we may do this, the terms concentration and samadhi must assume for us a richer and profound meaning. All our concentration is merely an image of the divine tapas, by which the self dwells gathered in itself, by which it manifests within itself, by which it maintains and possesses its manifestation, by which it draws back from all manifestation into its supreme oneness. Being dwelling in consciousness upon itself for bliss, This is the divine tapas, and a knowledge will dwelling in force of consciousness on itself and its manifestations is the essence of a divine concentration, the yoga of the Lord of Yoga. Given the self-differentiation of the divine in which we dwell, concentration is the means by which the individual soul identifies himself with and enters into any form, state, or psychological self-manifestation, bhava, of the self. To use this means for unification with the divine is the condition for the attainment of divine knowledge and the principle of all yoga of knowledge. This concentration proceeds by the idea, using thought, form, and name as keys which yield up to the concentrating mind the truth that lies concealed behind all thought, form, and name. For it is through the idea that the mental being rises beyond all expression to that which is expressed, to that of which the idea itself is only the instrument. By concentration upon the idea, the mental existence which at present we are breaks open the barrier of our mentality and arrives at a state of consciousness, the state of being, the state of power of conscious being and bliss, of conscious being to which the idea corresponds, and of which it is the symbol, movement, and rhythm. Concentration by the idea is then only a means, a key to open to us the superconscious planes of our existence. A certain self-gathered state of our whole existence lifted into that superconscious truth, unity, and infinity of self-aware, self-blissful existence is the aim and culmination, and that is the meaning we shall give to the term samadhi. Not merely a state withdrawn from all consciousness of the outward, withdrawn even from all consciousness of the inward into that which exists beyond both, whether as seed of both or transcendent even of their seed state, but a settled existence in the one and infinite, united and identified with it, and this status to remain whether we abide in waking consciousness or in the waking condition, in which we are conscious of the forms of things, or we withdraw into the inward activity which dwells in the play of the principle of things, the play of their names and typal forms, or we soar to the condition of static inwardness, where we arrive at the principles themselves and at the principle of all principles, the seed of name and form. For the soul that has arrived at the essential samadhi and is settled in it, samadhista, in the sense the Gita attaches to the word, has that which is fundamental to all experience and cannot fall from it by any experience, however distracting to one who has not yet ascended the summit. It can embrace all in the scope of its being without being bound by any or deluded or limited. When we arrive at this state, all our being and consciousness being concentrated, the necessity of concentration in the idea ceases. For there, in that supramental state, the whole position of things is reversed. The mind is a thing that dwells in diffusion, in succession. It can only concentrate on one thing at a time, and when not concentrated, runs from one thing to another very much at random. Therefore, it has to concentrate on a single idea, a single subject of meditation, a single object of contemplation, a single object of will, in order to possess or master it. And this it must do to at least the temporary exclusion of all others. But that which is beyond the mind and into which we seek to rise is superior to the running process of thought, superior to the division of ideas. The divine is centered in itself, and when it throws out ideas and activities, does not divide itself or imprison itself in them, but holds them and their movements in its infinity, undivided. Its whole self is behind each idea and each movement, and at the same time behind all of them together. Held by it, each spontaneously works itself out, not through a separate act of will, but by the general force of consciousness behind it. If to us there seems to be a concentration of divine will and knowledge in each, it is a multiple and equal, and not an exclusive concentration. And the reality of it is rather a free and spontaneous working, in a self-gathered unity and infinity. The soul which has risen to the divine samadhi participates in the measure of its attainment in this reversed condition of things, the true condition. For that which is the reverse of our mentality is the truth. It is for this reason that, as it has been said in the ancient books, The man who has arrived at self-possession attains spontaneously without need of concentration and thought and effort the knowledge or the result which the idea or the will in him moves out to embrace. To arrive then at this settled divine status must be the object of our concentration. The first step in concentration must be always to accustom the discursive mind to a settled, unwavering pursuit of a single course of connected thought on a single subject, and this it must do undistracted by all lures and alien calls on its attention. Such concentration is common enough in our ordinary life, but it becomes more difficult when we have to do it inwardly without any outward object or action on which to keep the mind. Yet this inward concentration is what the seeker of knowledge must effect. Nor must it be merely the consecutive thought of the intellectual thinker, whose only object is to conceive and intellectually link together his conceptions. It is not, except perhaps at first, a process of reasoning that is wanted so much as a dwelling so far as possible on the fruitful essence of the idea, which by the insistence of the soul's will upon it must yield up all the facets of its truth. Thus, if it be the divine love that is the subject of concentration, it is on the essence of the idea of God as love that the mind should concentrate in such a way that the various manifestation of the divine love should arise luminously, not only in thought, but in the heart and being and vision of the sadhaka. The thought may come first and the experience afterwards, but equally the experience may come first and the knowledge arise out of the experience. Afterwards, the thing attained has to be dwelt on and more held till it becomes a constant experience and finally the dharma or law of the being. This is the process of concentrated meditation, but a more strenuous method is the fixing of the whole mind in concentration on the essence of the idea only, so as to reach not the thought knowledge or the psychological experience of the subject, but the very essence of the thing behind the idea. In this process, thought ceases and passes into the absorbed or ecstatic contemplation of the object, or by emerging into it in an inner samadhi. If this be the process followed, then subsequently the state into which we must rise shall be called down to take possession of the lower being, to shed its light, power, and bliss on our ordinary consciousness. For otherwise, we may possess it as many do, in the elevated condition or in the inward samadhi, but we shall lose our hold of it when we awake or descend into the context of the world, and this truncated possession is not the aim of an integral yoga. A third process is neither at first to concentrate in a strenuous meditation on the one subject, nor in a strenuous contemplation of the one object of thought vision, but first to still the mind altogether. This may be done in various ways. One is to stand back from the mental action, although not participating in, but simply watching it, until tired of its unsanctioned leaping and running, it falls into an increasing and finally absolute quiet. Another is to reject the thought suggestions, to cast them away from the mind whenever they come, and firmly hold to the peace of the being, which really and always exists behind the trouble and ride of the mind. When this secret peace is unveiled, a great calm settles on the being, and there comes usually with it the perception and experience of the all-pervading silent Brahman, everything else at first seeming to be mere form and illusion. On the basis of this calm, everything else may be built up in the knowledge and experience no longer of the external phenomenon of things, but of the deeper truth of the divine manifestation. Ordinarily, once this state is obtained, strenuous concentration will be found no longer necessary. A free concentration of will, using thought merely for suggestion, and giving of light to the lower members will take its place. This will then insist on the physical being, the vital existence, the heart, and the mind remolding themselves in the form of the divine, which reveal themselves out of the silent Brahman. By swifter or slower degrees according to the previous preparation and purification of the members, they will be obliged with more or less struggle to obey the law of the will and its thought suggestion, so that eventually the knowledge of the divine takes possession of our consciousness on all its planes, and the image of the divine is formed in our human existence, even as was done by the old Vedic sadhakas. For the integral yoga, this is the most direct and powerful discipline.